Leah? Oh, there we go. Perfect. Hi, everyone. We'll give you a few moments to join us. We are so glad that you are here this evening, this afternoon, whenever you are watching this. We'll just give another moment. If you do have questions during this broadcast, please feel free to type them into the comments box on your right, or you can text them or email them to us, and we will be watching as the show goes on. So tonight it is my great pleasure to introduce Cindy Wasser. Cindy Wasser was called to the Ontario Bar in 1987 and practiced as a criminal defense lawyer until 2008. During her career, she successfully defended many high-profile cases at all levels of courts in Canada. She published papers and lectured at law schools and other university courses. Cindy was a founding director of the Association in Defense of the Wrongfully Convicted, the chair of the Criminal Justice Section of the Ontario Bar Association, and a member of many Law Society, Legal Aid, and Criminal Justice committees. In 2008, Cindy retired from criminal law to become a mom to the first of two perfectly created daughters using the assistance of human reproduction, ovum donation, and 2 gestational carriers. Her extraordinary journey through the medical and legal world of ART led her to start her legal practice in the area of fertility law. Cindy provides legal advice and services to intended parents, carriers, and donors. Since the RCMP investigation into ART began in February 2012, Cindy has also provided legal advice to other lawyers practicing fertility law, fertility medical practitioners, and fertility consultant agencies. Cindy has lectured in the area of fertility law at medical legal conferences and hospitals. Seeing a crisis for foreigners as the COVID situation developed, it was not surprising that Cindy took the lead to advocate on behalf of all foreigners having babies in Canada, establishing a submission process to Immigration Canada to allow her clients to travel into Canada for the purposes of having a baby and for medical purposes when strict travel restrictions were in place. She did this on behalf of all other lawyers without compensation. Cindy was not only a client of mine, she's also a dear friend, and I'm grateful that she's agreed to answer my many questions about the law and surrogacy in Canada. So if you are listening to this in Canada or abroad, please note that you could reach out to Cindy with any specific legal questions. As of today's date, January 11th, this episode is based on today's laws around surrogacy. As Cindy can attest to, we have seen lots of changes in this legal world, and so I always want to start with that. So welcome, Cindy. It's great to have you.
I should say we learned to do that quite carefully during COVID because while we were doing webinars, the law was changing behind our backs. So I would have the news channel on one of my monitors during the webinar, and I go, "Oh, immigration just announced something." But it's a little calmer now.
Absolutely. So Cindy, I'm going to ask you more of a personal question, and as it relates to the law, having gone through 2 surrogacy journeys, what advice would you give to people around the legal process and their either egg donor or surrogacy agreement?
So that's a great question. And I think it goes to the very root of why I switched practices and became a fertility lawyer. In my own experience, I felt that we were so unaware of not only what parenting meant, but certainly but what we should be looking at and what we were doing when we were creating a baby through this process. And it's not like we were educated or raised as children to think about donation and surrogacy when we made our families. It wasn't a thing my parents thought of. It didn't exist. And in fact, I had to educate my parents and teach them about baby making in the New World. But most people don't even have a clue about what it's really going to be like to become a parent. And I found at the beginning of my practice as well that people spent more time thinking about a new car and a pair of shoes than they did about how they were creating this baby. And I still see it. I still see people choosing, for example, and I know that there are good reasons and there are desperate reasons, but choosing to do it in an unsafe manner, in an unsafe place during a war, for example, where if I asked them if they would purchase a car from that country during the war or from that country ever, sort of online, they'd say, well, of course not. But they would have a real person, a baby, a child, created in that environment that is unsafe or um, discriminatory towards the woman who's caring for them. And so, for me, the number one reason and the number one point I like to make to all people is to think about the environment, to have a safe and healthy journey, because that is your child's conception story, their birth story. And it's much better to say how beautiful and safe it was and what the relationships were than to say we didn't know the surrogate. We had the baby almost thrown to us over a border with snipers or in a bomb shelter. That's a tragic story. I understand how it can happen, but if you don't have to do that, please think about doing it the safest way.
Absolutely. And I would second that. We have over the last 17 years, we've worked with intended parents who have traveled abroad, and we've heard beautiful and wonderful stories, and we've heard tragic stories of heartbreak and loss and devastation. And you know, I think it's often surprising to intended parents how deeply they fall in love with their surrogate and how they want to take care of her. And when your surrogate is, you know, you're in Toronto and she's in Vancouver and you can get on a plane and do that, is very different from, um, you know, uh, trying to get into a country that has been invaded by Russia. And so it's really, really, um, yeah, it is. If you can stay in Canada, if not, if you decide to engage in surrogacy in the U.S., which we'll talk about in a moment. But I want to catch you off guard for a second, Cindy. I want to talk to you about this surrogate that you were offered, to carry your first child that you
You're
turned
not catching me
down
off guard. You think
because,
I wasn't
you know,
expecting this?
I mean, for everybody listening, most of you that are watching this probably kind of know me. You might be working with CFC, or we've met on the internet. And it's a funny story how I met Cindy. It would have been, I don't know, how long ago, Cindy?
I would say it was likely 2006.
Okay, so 2006. Cindy signed up with an agency, which I was a surrogate. And I received her profile and I was so excited. And Joanne, the owner of that agency, said, I'm sure she's going to pick you. Like, it's going to be great, 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 great. And I'm waiting and I'm waiting. And I get this rejection letter. And I was, what? Like, someone's turning me down? Like, I'm healthy. I'm like responsible. I have kids, all of these things. And all these years, Cindy has said, it's because you lived far away. So while we're on the spot here, I may have a polygraph expert in your next room that's going to like come in. I don't know. Just,
I welcome it because the evidence is that doesn't tell the truth.
So yeah, like what gives? What's the real story? Why didn't you pick me? Was it a legal thing? Was it that I was in BC and you were in Ontario?
So I'm going to start by saying I don't regret that decision at all. I believe my life would have not gone on this trajectory if that had happened, and it was our destiny to not do that journey together. But the true reason at the time was twofold. I had told the agency, and this really does go to tips. There is a method to her madness here. Be clear with your agency about what is truly important to you. There were two very important things to me as a woman who was grieving the inability to make a baby. I had given up so much, one thing after another, to continue on in the journey to at least become a parent. And so by the end, it was like there are two things. One, my we're using an egg donor and my husband's sperm. And 2, I want to at least go to every doctor's appointment. So I want a 2-hour driving radius from Toronto because I was a criminal lawyer. It was very hard for me to hold off a jury and a judge and a prosecutor every day and say, I'm flying to Vancouver for 3 days to watch my surrogate do a pee test. And you lived in Courtenay. So I had to fly from Toronto to Vancouver and then to Courtenay. So we were actually looking at literally 3 days to watch you pee and would get back on the plane again. And I just thought that that was a bit overwhelming for me at the time. Also based on what I understood of the process, which was about that much at the time. Oh, my dog is howling. We're not going to do tips about how to be a good dog trainer. But my wonderful children are dealing with it. So, and then the other thing was that we were told by the agent that you wanted to be what's known as a traditional surrogate, which was to use your own egg and be inseminated with my husband's sperm. And of course, you lived in Courtenay, so you were geographically undesirable, to use the dating terms, and you wanted to use your own egg. And I could not fathom that. There wasn't enough psychological help in the world at that time for me to get me over that hurdle. And frankly, my husband too was uncomfortable with that notion of you carrying and being the biological parent. And we didn't get the support from the agency that I think you would have given to somebody going through that today, which is the psychological understanding of that process. And so it was a hard no. And then you came back and said, okay, I'll accept the embryo from the donor, but the geographical limit was still too much. And about a year or so after that, when they still hadn't found us a surrogate, we went back to the agency and said, okay, I've now given up the want of being at the doctor's appointments. What about that Leah person in Courtenay? And by then you had left that agency and we hadn't been told you had opened an agency, or I think I might have called you directly. Instead, our lawyer advised us to put an ad on Craigslist to find a surrogate, which I thought was a horrible idea. But the world knows that we lawyers, and if there are lawyers watching this now or in the future, I'm sure you will agree with me and invite you to call me and explain your disagreement. We make the worst clients because we think we know best and we don't listen. So I didn't want to be that. So I did put the ad in Craigslist and we found a surrogate and she got pregnant on the first try with the embryos. So I gave up on searching for you or anything. So I don't know if you want to hear the rest of that story, but that's why I rejected you. But okay. The end of the story, the happy ending, is that you opened up CFC that time and got a letter from Health Canada saying, hey, we need to know what you're doing because, it's illegal to take money just for matching. And you took that letter to my lawyer to respond. And she said, well, it is a criminal offense to get paid just for matching. So I think the letter should be responded to by a criminal defense lawyer. And I know just the one. She's my client. She has a surrogate. It's a terrible journey. And I'd like to refer you to her. And she told you my name. And you said, hell no, she rejected me. But you were clever enough to call me. And I wrote the letter. And we explained to Health Canada what remarkable services agencies do perform, or at least what yours was going to be doing. And you got 2 thumbs up and the first written approval by the Government of Canada for agencies' work. And not only that, but based on what I told them on my own journey at the time, it was a word of encouragement, right? Saying people really should have the protection of an agency. So, and then our business grew. When I decided to go into this, I called you from the hospital after Edo was born and said, I'm going to change this. And you said, you're the first lawyer in Canada who's been through the fertility process. I'm going to ask you to talk to my clients. And 14 years later, we've done so much business, and I'm the largest fertility law firm in Canada. And we didn't just do business, but as you started off by saying, we became pretty damn good friends.
Absolutely.
Which doesn't mean I don't ream you out.
And I was just going to say, we put our punching gloves on every once in a while. We argue, I argue as an agency or on behalf of, and Cindy argues on behalf of, and it is so important when you're working with an agency or independently that your lawyer doesn't work for your agency doesn't work for your lawyer, and that there is a definite division there. And one of the questions that we have, which I think speaks to that, is from international intended parents, and they want to know if it is required that they follow the law where they live. It's a text, Cindy. Sorry.
Okay.
If they follow the law where they live first, the law in Canada, they live in the Netherlands, and they don't know where to start legally.
So international clients need to have legal advice in both countries. They need it here because this is where the journey will be. So they need to understand how they're going to become parents here and comply with the law. And they need to know how they will be recognized as parents of their Canadian baby when they go home. And sadly, neither I nor any of my colleagues in Canada, as far as I know, have a license to practice in other countries, except one can do France, but we can't. I can't. So we always like to start with making sure you have legal advice in your home country, and we work with that lawyer. At Hope Springs, we recommend people all the time. I'm actually writing a book on fertility law that will have global outreach, and so I've got about a dozen or so co-authoring agreements out with lawyers all over the world, and we work very closely, and that book will share how it all works together. But you need that advice now. And
do they need that advice first?
I always
your
say
advice
that,
first.
But people say, sure, she's the lawyer. She's going to say, start with me. Agencies say, start with us. Doctors say, start with us. But not really, because I think if I don't know that something is legal, I don't think I want to bother talking to everyone else.
Okay.
But obviously you're in business and the clinics are in business and we're open and the businesses are out there. So people know it's legal in some way.
Right.
So it doesn't hurt if the first call is to the agency or the clinic.
Okay.
This isn't an underground system, but the nuances. And so I like them to, and it's taking a long time to get everything started. It's sort of like getting one of those 2,000-piece puzzles. And you like the picture and you go, yeah, that's the one I'm bringing home. And then you open it up and they're all this tiny and there's only 3 colors to the whole thing. And you dump it on the table and you go, I don't know where to begin, And it's one piece at a time, and it's the edge, always the edges, right? And so you have to talk to all of those people.
And I would say from an agency perspective, or from my perspective, when you say the edges of the puzzle, it makes perfect sense, because if the edges are done, then the relationship or the middle is insulated, because all of these pieces are taken care of, and lawyers do a great job of framing it, And so with that, what would you say when people are interviewing a lawyer are the top 3 things that people need to ask a Canadian lawyer who is going to work with them either for egg donation and surrogacy? Just 3.
That's not fair.
Yeah, 3 and 1 sentence each.
Like, what are you, Brene Brown? So, okay. So number 1 is, I think, service. Communication service.
Okay.
How quickly you're responded to is very important. How quickly we do the work is important. Number 2 is experience. And when I say number 1, 2, I don't mean in order of importance, but I do think communication, respectful, fast communication is important. And their experience is very important. You don't hire a real estate lawyer to do your surrogacy work. And number 3 is the relationship they have with the rest of the team. It takes a village to create a baby through assisted reproductive technology. So you want your lawyer, agency, and clinic to be working together so that we can communicate to you in a less troubling fashion and fix things. Because while there are the odd people who can describe having a journey that's just beautiful like this, most people, thousands that I've dealt with have journeys that are more like this. And there are things I fix with you that sometimes the clients don't know about, or the clinic and you fix, the clinic and I fix, that they don't need to know about until maybe even later or never, because why stress them out if we fixed it?
Absolutely. And in terms of
That wasn't
things
one
that,
sentence each, I know.
I always, I know that the question I get all the time is, if contracts in Canada aren't enforceable, which I don't believe. I believe that as soon as a contract goes before the courts, it will become enforceable. And the good news in Canada, as I always say to people, is that a surrogate's never changed her mind. And the bad news in Canada is that a surrogate's never changed her mind. We don't know. However, I'd love for you to speak to sort of what that means. Like, in the US, you can get a pre-birth order, which sounds really fancy and great, but how does that compare to in Canada, how you become the parents?
Okay.
And
So,
could she change her mind and keep the baby?
yeah. So, okay. Quick answer is anyone can say it's their baby. We do not have pre-orders in Canada, pre-birth orders, because we can't ask a court to declare you to be the parent of a thing that doesn't exist. A fetus is not a life. Until it is born, heartbeat, brainwave, it is not a life, and it has no rights. It's deserving of protection, and you could be charged with a criminal offense for neglecting the care of the baby, if taking drugs and stuff. But it has no rights otherwise. So what they do in the states where they give those is the judge is saying, she's pregnant. The intention is to give this baby when it's born to these people. So, once the second it's born, until you guys all come back, this court is saying it is going to be their baby, so to speak. And then after the baby's born, there is another application to say, okay, baby's born, you are the parents, now you can get a birth certificate. So practically speaking, it is the same time period after the birth before you have a birth certificate. We don't need a pre-birth order in Canada. You don't need that protection in Canada, because we actually have laws in each province that say you will be the parent at birth if you entered into this agreement. And she had independent advice, and each province has various wording around that. So we actually have it in a statute. We have it in judicial law, recognized by judges already. That makes it safer. They need to go to court and do these pre-birth orders because they don't have it written in legislation. So, yes, I could go to court, and I say this to my clients all the time if any of them are watching. I could show up and say, I have an interest in this baby and I'd like to be declared its mother. But our courts don't make rulings without evidence. So we file on these declarations, all these affidavits from the parents, a letter from the clinic saying how the embryo was made, and the surrogate signs her consent in her affidavit saying, hey, it's their baby. The agreement, surrogate's affidavit says, I had a lawyer, I understood what I was doing. And the judge says, cool, I have all the evidence that these are the parents. So if Cindy shows up and says, but I want to be the parent, the judge will say, okay, Ms. Wasser, what's your evidence? Well, I don't have any. And it's going to look really bad for me when my clients say, worse, Your Honor, she was our lawyer. Then he's going to say, you've gone crazy and stripped me of my license to practice. And the same if you show up, you're crazy. Now pay for everyone's legal bills too. So it doesn't happen. So if the surrogate shows up and says, I don't want to give them the baby, the judge is going to say, but here's the evidence. You agreed. Did you understand what you were doing? Yes, I did. Or no, I didn't. No, you didn't. Let's hear from your lawyer. I'm pretty sure no lawyer is going to fall on the sword and say, yeah, I did a really bad job at advising the surrogate. She never knew what she was talking about. I didn't care. I just wanted to get the money from the agency. They're not going to say that. They're going to say she damn well did know. So the judge is going to say, and now let's look at the physical element. The doctor says she's not the mother. They made an embryo with the genetic material of other people, whether it's parents or donors. But we can still get a DNA test to make sure that she's not the mother. And the DNA says she's not the mother. The judge says, lady, like, what is this?
Right.
That's it. So it's not going to happen. So I feel, as a criminal lawyer who always worries about the worst case scenario and is a bit of a Debbie Downer, I don't worry about this as the thing that could go wrong. Not this.
Okay.
A lot of other things, but not
Yes,
that.
I know. And that's, when I talk to intended parents, or when we talk to intended parents, we often talk about a theoretical risk, like we just did,
Mm-hmm.
and a true risk, like something that is a real risk. And as you're talking to your lawyer, you want to be able to talk that through so that you can settle into this journey you're going through. Because if you have a concern, as Cindy said, having that communication where a lawyer is willing to move through all of those elements with you to get to the end where the lawyer will say, and here's why you will remain the parents. Here's how you will be named the parents, which is really, really important. I didn't realize, Cindy, we have a lot of questions
Okay.
in the comments. So I'm going to read
We're going
some
to
of
have
them.
to do part 2, just like
We are definitely doing part 2. So the first one is, what would you recommend? And again, before Cindy makes any recommendations, I want to say that while this is an informational, fun coaching call, anything specific legal advice, please reach out to Cindy directly, as she can't give sort of legal advice based on a question in a comment. So the first question is, what would you recommend to international same-sex intended parents with different last names, concerned about traveling with a baby with 2 dads and different last names?
Not in this country.
Okay. Traveling outside of Canada, though.
Well, I don't know where that's a problem in most countries. Not that I'm
I would
aware
agree,
of.
because on the passport that your
The
baby will
Canadian
travel with,
baby will have a Canadian passport with its real name.
and the
And the
parents'
passport,
names.
well, their name isn't on the passport, but the passport can only be obtained by the parents of the newborn.
Right.
So they will have been established as parents in order to get the passport. And so if you watch when they scan your passport, what's coming up on the screen, if you ever get to glance quickly and see, is the information from your immigration department saying who are the parents.
Right.
And that's why, if you're traveling with only one parent, it is a very good idea to have a notarized letter of consent from the other, because they're going to say, hey, where's the other parent? They know. They know if you're on a no-fly list, it all pops up. So they're going to see the rightful parents are Smith and Jones, or whatever those names are. And it's the modern world. I don't have the same last name as the father of my children, then they have his name and not mine.
Absolutely.
Of course, if anyone watches them at the airport, they'll know that they're my children because of the behavior.
I have traveled through the airport with Cindy's kids. They're lovely. Next question. Can you go over the particular legal issues for a surrogacy and birth in Quebec for intended parents in Canada?
Okay. So let's dispel the myth. It's not that surrogacy is illegal in Quebec. Surrogacy is legal throughout this country. Quebec doesn't get to say, no province gets to say it's illegal. But each province has the authority to decide how we register the birth of the baby. So if the baby is born in Quebec, it must be registered in accordance with provincial law in Quebec. And the provincial law in Quebec says that the surrogacy agreement is not a valid agreement. So the woman who gave birth must register the birth. Now, because saying only she can be a parent rules out the male parent or the other parent, the judges have had to read into the law to say that's unconstitutional, So we would have to say there could be a single father as well. And so the law developed through judge-made law, through the high courts in Quebec, to say that there could be the registration of a single father. So the mother, the biological father, or of course both of them. So what means is that the other parent of the intended parents isn't going to be able to register the birth. If you're Canadian, however, and any other province, including Quebec, you can do what we call a consent adoption. So it doesn't involve social services coming, it's not a full adoption. And then you can adopt the baby in the province of Quebec. But foreigners are not allowed to do any kind of adoption in Canada. So that other intended parent will not be on a birth certificate in Quebec. So surrogacy is a fabulous option for any single father, not a single mother looking for it, because she won't be on it. The birth mother will, the surrogate. Or for intended parents who are okay with the other parent not being on it, and they might be having to do an adoption in their own country. Beware Europeans. The European court has just recently, not just, but sort of recent in terms of how quickly the law moves, like it's a while ago, said that these babies need to be recognized. So this whole adoption process is going to be changing rapidly in all European countries. It already is in the Netherlands. And, two parents recognized as parents in Canada will now be recognized in the Netherlands. So that's going to make it less interesting for people to choose Quebec. But we have a lot of French clients who don't speak English very well, and they choose the ability to communicate beautifully with the French-speaking surrogate over the ability of the other parent to be on the birth certificate. And that's, as long as they're informed, that's their choice. They'll still do an adoption in France and be okay eventually in France.
So I have a follow-up question to that. If intended parents are in Ontario and you represent them, can they come back to Ontario with their baby? And can you complete the post-birth documents based on Ontario law? Because they're from Ontario.
Yeah, so well, each province has its format for birth registration. Most of the provinces include in their law, under the vital statistics legislation, that they will accept an order out of province from a court of the same level. So if you live in Ontario, you have the right to use the Ontario court because you live here with your baby. So we can bring an application and do a court-ordered declaration of parentage in Ontario because you reside here. And the judge will say, you're the parents, not the surrogate, and we order the registrar of the other province to register the birth. Now, the only two provinces who don't legitimately...
So would that be, I just want to stop for 1 sec, would that be a heterosexual couple, surrogate in Quebec, they come back to Ontario, would mom and dad be recognized in Ontario?
Yeah, or same sex.
Yeah, amazing.
So I've called the registrar in Quebec and asked specifically to make sure that they'll accept that, and was told verbally yes. Now that was some time ago because we haven't had the situation yet. So, but the other option is if they renege and say, oh no, we never said that and we won't, because they might, I still do the court order here and send it to them. And if they don't accept it at the registry office, then you take the court order to the court in Quebec, where the judge says, I recognize it with my authority as a similar order that could be made, and then the registrar will do that. So the worst consequence is that you pay me to do a court order here, and you pay the lawyer in Quebec to get it recognized by a judge there. And, I'm going to work with that lawyer to work on those legal fees for you, because we both are going to be seriously excited to make that happen. And I look at your face and I think I could probably get you to chip in on that one.
Absolutely. And, as Cindy and I have talked.
We're going to shame everyone.
Right. And as Cindy and I have.
Shame my colleague and friend in Alberta to do
Alberta, we're coming for you.
Listening, shame.
I feel like I need to have a surrogate in Alberta with no genetic connection just so that I can be the person to fight it. If you are watching this webinar, if you can believe there is still a province in Canada,
please create a sexy situation for us.
Yes, there is in Alberta. In Alberta, you still have to be genetically connected to a child to become their parent. And for our clients who met in cancer treatment, who can't have their own genetic child, for people that, grow up, get married, and are both infertile and can't genetically be connected to a child, to have a provincial government that is still so backwards that they would believe that a genetic relationship makes a parent is so disgusting and so just it blows my mind in this world today, 2023, but here we are. That's
I'm
enough
working
about
on
that.
it. I currently have a few clients who live in Ontario who have surrogates in Alberta, and I put in the contract that they may seek a declaration in Ontario, because Alberta's legislation says we will not accept it, and it's got to be unconstitutional as well.
Yes.
So I'm going for it, and they're not going to pay the price. It may take time, but
no, absolutely. So we have
bring it on.
We have 4 minutes left. I want to just zip through some of these questions. Someone's asking about Saskatchewan. Are there any specific law differences? And I want to give a shout out to Marisha Pack.
You're cutting out.
Packin.
Marisha
Cindy, how
Paquin.
do I
You
say
cut out.
Marisha's last name? She's a lawyer in
Paquin.
Saskatchewan. Oh,
Paquin. Very French.
Paquin. Marisha is amazing. She is a lawyer in Saskatchewan that we work with, and the laws there recently have changed. No genetic connection required. Fast-ish birth process, post-birth process. And I will tell you, our surrogates that we work with there are amazing. Many of them are like farm families. They just, the hard workers are great. Yep, hard workers, great people.
Marisha was, I would say, before she started working on this, was probably to a junior intermediate level in law, and started working with the government to make these changes. And I watched her blossom and turn into what I have to say is the respective senior counsel. She is fabulous. I love working with her. And so we do the contract. You have a surrogate in Saskatchewan. Marisha will do your court order in Saskatchewan, and we're there. We're not going to lose our clients. We stay in touch. I always demand of my clients to send pictures, if not bring me babies to hold, if it's geographically possible, and nobody has COVID. But yeah, you're in great hands. And the court order she's obtaining within a few days, a week max. It takes about another week to get a birth certificate. There's not a lot of infrastructure for registering them, but you're still, the average everywhere is 3 to 4 weeks, except with Hope Springs in Ontario. We're fast.
Ontario is fast. There are a few questions from Emma. Emma, if you could email me directly, I'm not understanding your questions, and I want to make sure we answer them. And
put them in the chat. I can see.
They are there in the comments. It just says
I'm comments. I've got it open, but I don't see anything.
Oh, maybe it's just showing to me.
On.
So the last
question.
Oh
my God! I had to click on the comments.
I know.
I'm so sorry, everyone. How long?
No, I'm asking. I'm asking you these.
Early. Okay.
So my next question actually is a text question, and it is: my clinic says and remember, we only have like a couple minutes. My clinic says I don't need an egg donor contract because she's anonymous. Is that the case?
It has nothing to do with whether you know her contact information or not. The law in virtually every province, if not written, would be dictated by a judge, if not written, and it would say that a donor has no rights as a parent by virtue of only being a donor. So the sperm donor is a donor, but with the intention of parenting. So
then why do you need a contract?
You don't in law. There's actually no federal or provincial mandate for an egg donor contract. So before you wonder why I'm screwing myself out of a mortgage payment or something, let me explain the good reasons why I recommend it. So I actually didn't have one with my donor. And I believe I didn't get great advice about that because, by luck of grace, my donor turned out to be a phenomenal person, and we are still in contact, and my children know her. And so I have all the satisfaction of feeling safe with her and who she is. But there are things you need to know as your children grow up, and I've lived them now. I don't just say it. Your children start asking you medical questions, identity questions. When will this happen to me? When will puberty happen to me? And do I have siblings out there? You know? And do you want to be the parent that says, well, we didn't want to spend, $1,500, $1,600 more, so we don't have the answer? Or yes, you do. There's a little boy in France. There's a little girl in Canada. This is their birthday. And the other thing is they grow up way too fast and they start having crushes. And you're going to start wondering, are the kids in her class egg donor babies? Could they possibly be related? And, or in his class. So you need to have this list. And if she's anonymous in particular, I think it's more dangerous because she's not going to think about you in 20 or 30 years if she gets breast cancer. My donor will always think of me and call me right away as soon as she can to say I'm sick and I get my kids in for testing. That's critical to me. The other thing is if something happens to my children and they need bone marrow, blood, kidney transplant, I can't say my donor would give her kidney, but I'm pretty certain she'd go through every test to the very last minute before she decided for us. And I'm standing over my child going, I know I did everything I could because I kept her in my life.
Absolutely. And, being the owner of CFC, being the owner of Egg Helpers, I've seen, thousands of egg donations. I've been a donor 6 times. My adult children have participated as donors. And when I started donating, literally almost 20 years ago, it was very different. I did a couple of anonymous donations and some known donations. And it is amazing to me how this shift with these DNA companies like 23andMe have really shifted the conversation. And so I would suggest that anyone out there, or I would invite anyone that's listening to really look into what anonymity truly is or isn't. This year I did 23andMe and found a child that had no idea that they were donor conceived. And it was really hard for me to make that connection as a donor, given that, that they didn't want to find out that way. And I think as we grow as people, as we grow within these communities and have conversations and take these conversations more public, which I'm hoping to do with our our biweekly calls and coaching calls and our podcast, which this will be part of. It's all really, really interesting to see how we're moving forward in the world of third-party reproduction and the law. So we are going to do a part 2 of this because there is so much more to talk about. So thank you so much, Cindy. I truly appreciate you you coming on. Anyone that didn't have a question answered, we are going to email all participants with Cindy's link, with my link. You can connect with me personally or with Cindy as well. It has been great to speak with you, and we will connect again in 2 weeks. So thanks again for listening.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure. I hope I was useful to some people. Can I just say we missed one quick one. Someone asked about Surrogacy Manitoba. It's good too. It's all fine.
Absolutely, it is. Absolutely.
Amazing lawyer there too.
Robin Kazina. Yes.
Robin's fabulous.
Okay.
So we'll follow up with that.
Amazing. So we will talk to you soon.
Okay.
And you are welcome for the great info,
You too.
Playful
See you next
Adventurer. We'll
time.
talk to you
Thank
soon.
you.